This episode was suggested by Tarek Kaddoumi and various others who asked about the impact of culture on enterprise architecture. By that I don't just mean organisational culture, but at the much larger scale, the scale of the entire society, the entire region. A real example we came across very early on was in the difference between what we call the small country attitude versus the big country. In the big countries, for which most of our frameworks are built, enterprise architecture is based on large teams, large specialisation, and you use documents to connect between them. But in the smaller countries, by which I mean there's a small technical pool, such as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Netherlands, Sweden, it's done a very different way. Because the technical pool is so small, there is no room for ultimate specialists, or there aren't anything like as many specialists. Everyone's done a bit of everything. Everyone is thinking like an architect before they start. So we don't have these rigid separations. Instead, people already know what most of the communications are. So although our frameworks are built for big country approaches and big country cultures, what we actually need in a highly agile, rapidly changing environment is actually what the small countries already do. So there's some interesting cultural aspects that come up from there. And talking with Tarek Kaddoumi reminded me about an old 1950s novel by Neville Shute called Round the Bend, which was about a very technical environment, in that case aircraft. But he said that when you're working in the East, you have to understand that everything is about prayer, that religion is a much deeper engagement in the whole society, and therefore in everything that everyone does. So a structure which assumes that everything is mechanistic, an approach that is where everything is mechanistic, actually doesn't work very well. So, talking with Tarek, we looked at what enterprise architecture might look like if it had started from an Islamic culture. And we'd see things like zakat, the requirement for responsibility, the role of what is effectively tax. There's also the idea that usury or banking is a sin, is evil. You've got the localization very much around the tribe of the people and centered not on a technocracy but on the relationships within the people. And there are quite different boundaries. For example, in Islamic culture there's much stronger separation between the genders, so much so that people don't really like having the idea of different groups mixing together. If we started with enterprise architecture from an Indian culture, we might look at which of the gods would be related to each of the tasks that we do. Which of the tasks would be supported by Ganesh, which one's by Shiva or Shakti. We might look much more at the role of Jugad, the idea of making do with what we have, rather than always looking for the next most technical solution. Or what might we learn if we built an enterprise architecture that started from the East Asian cultures, where the culture is built very much around seniority, that the individual doesn't have anything like the dominance, or the specialist does not have anything like the dominance that it does in Western cultures. There is the whole issue of loss of face, which means that taking risks is actually much harder. And also the idea that the leader, by definition, is the person who has the answers, which doesn't work well when we're in a rapid changing environment where no one actually has the answer beforehand. So there are lots of things that we can look at where culture becomes a really useful lens to apply to how we look at enterprise architecture itself, and in turn looking at how enterprise architecture connects back to the culture that we're in.